I found that moving outside my patterning and even the sensing body is like coming back to more natural, less like culturally patterned
Yeah.
body. It's interesting learning things you're doing, like talking about this front of the spine. And I'll think, oh, that's what these meditation teachers were talking about, but they had this mystified way of talking about it.
Thanks for doing this, Sean. I'm really excited to speak with you. You have a very interesting background, and I'm going to let you explain your background.
At the moment, I'm painting, I'm an artist. I studied some art when I was young, but then I got interested in the classics. And so I went to a program where we studied classics in science, philosophy, literature, history, theology, the great books program. While I was there, a monk came and visited from Europe. The community had Germans and Africans and Indians and
Hmm.
all people from all over. Look, it started in Austria. They had a castle in Austria that they got and painted these like apocalyptic mystical visions.
Oh,
It was kind of an esoteric, like Christian community. I was with them in Europe and then in Brazil, but then left them and went to a Maronite community, and the Maronites are Aramaic Christian community, like from Syria, Lebanon, the Middle East. But the place was in the States and in Canada. Then I went off and was kind of a hermit in Colorado and for a couple years. And then after doing that, I realized that I got what I needed out of that. And I was getting back interested in art. I went back into art in New Hampshire, doing art and teaching. I was teaching both fine arts and liberal arts. One was an art institute in college. I taught a course in fairy tales, art history, and taught some art to fine art classes. I studied with some Russian painters who do Russian icons,
I
Russian
think
orth. It's a
so. That tradition.
stylized form of Christian painting that was developed mostly by monks and nuns. They had the monks and nuns would have experiences of light, different kinds of light. And then they were trying to put that into the paintings, which would usually be biblical or saints or things like that, mythical. They called it bodily light, the light we see with our eyes. But then they
Mm.
said there's a light of the soul, light of the spirit,
Mm.
divine light. And so they were trying to represent that in paint.
Mm. Mm.
So they developed kind of technique with the tradition. So they'd pass on. It was slowly developed. It didn't emphasize like the individual much, but more like the tradition, like that
Mm.
you absorb these techniques. I studied with some Russians and I found it very interesting because it really integrated a lot of philosophy and meditation and alchemy. So a lot of it is for the artist. So they consider all the materials symbolic, and that making the image is symbolic of the process of the world and what the world is meant to become.
Mm.
They'll paint on wood boards, which are like plants, and they'll use eggs to make their paint from the animals and stones to make paint from the minerals. So you have mineral, plant, animal, and
Mm.
then you're the human painter, and then you open yourself to like spiritual. It's like all parts of creation are being engaged. It has a lot of craft to it. You make your own paints. You kind of learn about different stones to grind paints and use
Yeah.
gold leaf. But it actually goes back to Egyptian painting. They would paint on the mummery, the
Mm-hmm.
casket, the portrait. They would try to paint the person's face so that it communicated what they saw from the other side of death. I came from Egyptian ideas about the soul and immortality and their art, and then Christians in Egypt. It was kind of a syncretism because there were Greeks in Egypt around Christian times, there were Romans, there were Syrians, Persians. In Egypt, there was a nice like blending of a lot of things. And so this art came out of Roman portrait painting and Greek and then Egyptian and
Hmm.
then Christian ideas. So I found that when I studied like a 1 week course with this Russian the first time, I thought, oh, I learned more in a week than in all of art school. We never made our own paints.
Yeah,
We didn't prepare like wood panels. We didn't,
yeah.
it was just buy your tubes and
You get immersed in the process more when you're doing all of that.
the material part of it.
Yeah.
Because I've done digital art too, which is kind of
Hmm.
interesting, but it doesn't, I don't know, there's kind of an emptiness, I feel like comparatively to actually, the embodied materials and then seeing the textures that you actually
Yeah,
get from your materials and the light effect.
yeah. I mean, digital art is almost just like fingertips and vision. It's pure visual almost, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like on the mural I'm doing, I'm mixing things into it like marble dust and to get a
Hmm.
fresco, a matte
Yeah,
fresco. And then I'll like to have people come and say like, touch it, feel.
that's cool.
And they'll
Yeah.
be hesitant, they don't, but I'm excited about the feeling also, not just the visual, like the
Yeah.
whole. Do you know I forget, he's a Chinese, lives in Germany. I think his name is Bong Joon-ho. He's a very interesting writer, but he was talking about that one thing he observed was he said like older times, you'd have something like a painting, an object that you would own and hold and like travel with. But like a digital thing, you don't have an object, you have access to something. You have access to this data,
I
but
I
you don't
know.
have something. I really like that part of the art, like the whole matter and the body and like how it can draw you in and then the layers. It seemed like you do this in your work. It's like in the icon, you're taking a piece of wood and you have an egg from a chicken and you have rocks you grind up but then they see layers in that, like that, well, I have minerals in me. I have plant life in me. Where can I find that? And then even like different kinds of light. And so I noticed you often will like do something with the body or the vision but then I don't know how you would describe it, kind of like connect and expand it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to deconstruct the idea of what it is to be in a body. And, at one point I called it just an information process. If you think of your body as just an information process and think of what pieces of information am I missing, it kind of neutralizes a lot of the identification with issues that you have or body problems or it takes away a ton of
Mm,
shame because it's just an
mm,
experiment. It's just a way to use material and deconstruct and then reconstruct it, like the eggs, and now you're transforming it into paint. To be
mm.
able to do that, I mean, that's the creative process, right? You're creating some sort of transformation and then reconstituting it into something else, and that's fun.
Yeah, and then it's like analogous connections or something you'll make, feeling your front of your spine, and then like feeling that's a centered in my body, but then feeling more centered in my like thinking and emotions, like that, like the choice thing, like with the vision, and then but expanding that to choice vision or
Yeah, I mean, I call it the raw material of our experience because we use all those embodied words for a reason. It's how
yeah.
we feel and experience things. And when we get specific and granular, it's easier to communicate what's happening on a felt sense level to somebody else. So that shared experience becomes real and palpable. I think the aim for a lot of communication, art, trying to do it in different ways so that you can feel it, you can vibe it, like, the texture that you're putting into the mural, that it's an experience that you're sharing and it's visceral. There's a realness to it. I think that can happen without the material. I mean, light is a material. So I think that can happen, but it's so biased right now, our visual bias to information processing, because it's all coming in through our eyes. There's not as much tactile and spatial connection and the sound. What's interesting is there's a lot of these listening bars happening where you go in and you're listening to vinyl and it's about listening. And I think people are craving that. I think one article I saw, people are talking about it's like a womb. Our auditory system is 100% formed in utero. So when you are born, it's done, it's cooked.
Mm.
And so it's been baked inside, and you've been bonding with the mother and the sounds of her ambient internal noises, but also the sound of her voice, which in that matrix will come in unexpectedly, randomly, and at higher frequency. So what the fetus does is connect to it. It draws attention. So there's this internal attentional attunement and bonding that happens even before you come out of the womb.
Wow.
Yeah. So sound is a really emotional, phenomenal force. It's a vibration. It's a touch, basically.
Yeah, with the practice of listening from the body and from the front of the spine that you can point out. It's like well, I've done it before, but I didn't really like to focus on it and go,
Mm.
oh, that's why those are like times when I really enjoyed music, is when it was like in my whole
Yeah. Yeah.
body. With the visual, it's interesting. I was reading one book, he said, well, like in past times, say medieval times or lots of times, that people would know directly the things that were important for their life,
Mm.
like the seeds and the seasons and the tools, and they'd make their own tools. But now, most of what we know is indirect. It's far away. It's about things far away through
Hmm.
images. These images that are about things that are removed from us, rather than my direct knowledge through my body and my senses.
Yeah.
And one of my tutors, I was in college, we were studying like science and philosophy and math, and but he would always he would say that just what you said, that he thought we were getting overly visual
Yeah.
and losing contact with touch. You could say like the whole felt sense touch.
Yeah.
And he pointed out that Aristotle, like how much Aristotle's thinking is rooted in touch. They said you don't understand it in English because they translate it in like
Mm.
abstractions, whereas he wasn't talking in abstraction. He was talking like American Indians talk. Like when I
Right.
hear old American Indians talk, like it's always very concrete, and the
Hmm.
names they
Yeah.
give are.
Yeah.
Well, Aristotle actually wrote like that, but he gets translated like most of our philosophy
Interesting.
is very abstract. But
Huh.
he didn't use any words that and he spoke about that. He thought that the mind should use words that have the most sense information,
Yeah.
even if you're extending it to talk about like more general things. He said he was against making up new words, just use it, like light or seeing, and then you extend
Mhm.
it to like understanding. This tutor, he really emphasized how much that that kind of thinking was rooted in touch. And the other senses were kind of, even the other senses like vision, rooted in touch, like having
Mhm.
them. And so in doing your exercises, it helped me a lot with that. I thought, oh, I'm like connecting my vision to
Mm.
like my sacrum and through my feeling. And it's made me more aware.
Were you able to feel the concept of space? That was hard at first, right?
Yeah, I got that. And when you said how that like awakens the sensors in the skin too, like that synesthesia you talked about, like feeling with my vision, the space. Yeah, I could get that. And
Yeah.
it helped me see, looking back at my life, like one place on retreat I was at, they had us write different autobiographies, like just a basic one. They had us write a spiritual autobiography, a sexual autobiography, like from different perspectives, write an autobiography. So then when I was doing your things, I thought, oh my, I could write like a visual autobiography of my life, like how
Oh,
my,
nice.
because in like feeling this more connected way of seeing, focusing more clearly and trying to integrate it, I can see the difference, like when I wasn't like that. And sometimes I was far out. Yeah, that's interesting for me, like feeling this and looking back and then thinking the idea of being able to see. I don't know all the reasons. Some of it was a lot of white noise. I mean, I can think of phases in my life, even years, when I just wasn't seeing or noticing with my vision. Sometimes people saying, "Well, you're an artist. You didn't notice that, like that visual thing or the light." 'Cause I don't, for other reasons, the white noise, and maybe I think
Uh,
an effort too, like trying to effort,
uh-huh.
like it was
Yep.
actually blocking me from
Yep.
seeing.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, we do that all the time. We kind of check out or the bandwidth is narrowed, but as a really easy way to shift out of narrowing your perception is learning how to use your vision in different ways and learning how to maybe trace with the nose feather so that you get the dimensions of the space that you're in,
mm,
or because what you're doing is you're tracking, you're doing a smooth pursuit tracking, which we normally don't do. We're usually darting around. And so when
mm,
you do that, there's a level of control and presence. It's kind of like handwriting, but you need to be
mm,
controlled and connected to this fine motor skill. So that's a fine motor skill with your attention and your whole body movement, your head movement. And so everything kind of comes together to do that task. And that's a really easy way to bring yourself into the present. When that white noise thing, right? When you feel the white noise thing, and sometimes I see the white noise like when I'm working with my vision, and I'll go through a phase where something comes up and there's like a film that comes up, and I've had enough that I know what's going to happen. There's a film that comes up, it looks almost oily, and I don't do anything because sometimes if you get that, you'll try to clear it up, but I'm used to it now. It comes up, and I just wait. And I just wait, and I know it's going to pass. And when it passes, it's like it was a wash. It's a cleaner,
mm.
visual perception. And I don't know what that is. I don't really know what that is, but it comes up in different ways. Sometimes it looks like a white, like misting, and
Mhm.
then it goes away. I posit that, I may be touching into a place where maybe in my brain or memory or have checked out, and maybe I'm just like doing a defrag. You know what that is in computers?
Like kind of clearing out the.
Yeah, back in
Mm,
the day where you do a defrag process to clean out some of the computational junk that gets left around. That's how I think
mm.
about it. It's interesting. It's all interesting, right? To me,
Yeah.
now everything is, that's interesting. It could branch out in a lot of different ways, and it doesn't scare me to, at this point, it doesn't scare me to find myself drifting somewhere and being comfortable knowing that I'll come back to center. You mentioned something when you're doing the visual stuff. You recognize some of your limitations that you had earlier as a younger artist. Can you talk about what that was that you noticed?
Yeah. And it's like something that I'm still like kind of wondering and exploring. And but I noticed when I left the monastery life and was just out on my own, and then I was trying to get into art and make it my career if I could. I mean, I had studied with the Russian painters, but then I went and was studying with a painter who had an atelier. It tends to be used for like a certain tradition that came from France. So the classical and impressionist kind of tradition that an artist would just have a space and people would come and work, and then he'd come around, once or twice a week and look at what you did and tell you, and then
Oh,
you
okay.
just go and work, and then he'd do his work. But so this was a painter who had one of these, but it was very visual oriented, whereas the icons were like symbolic and kind of conceptual,
Mm.
like this higher light and kind of how do
Mm-hmm.
we, so not really like looking so much, just you
Yeah.
learn and you paint it, the style. It's similar to like the Tibetan Buddhist painting, or you just learn like here's how you paint the Buddha's eyes, and like you're not looking and observing nature.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
at the atelier, it was very much like just observing light, and we'd have a statue and we'd pick and we'd learn to observe the light form and then color. And I was interested, but I noticed I had a hard time doing that.
Mm.
And I was struck because I'm like, oh, this is like what I like and what I'm doing, but it's like there's like webbing, like it's like fuzz and things. So I did it, but I noticed like I found it hard, and I was still more drawn to like kind of symbolic, imaginative,
Mm.
Jungian like kind of art, which is
Right.
which I think because I had like so much stuff that was trying to like come out in my dreams and things that like just looking with my eyes, I don't know, kind of like being flooded. And I've noticed like that's one kind of trajectory I can see in my vision and my art. I wanted to study both, like just
Mm.
very like visual impressionistic and then this medieval Egyptian symbolic. I was interested in like they really set each other off. Like I would go to my Russian icon teacher, Vladislav, and I'd bring him something I've been working on. And he said, it was like an angelic image. And he said, oh, well, why is that green? Because green means this.
Mm.
Like, and it's a whereas I'd bring it to the atelier and he'd go, oh, if you put a little more blue there, it would like bring out that or something. Like
Mm-hmm.
just visually, he wouldn't,
Yeah.
whereas the icon would be like, well, this means this color. I liked seeing that they really set each other off, kind of. But I noticed that the purely visual was harder for me. There was this resistance and things. And over time, it shifted, and that purely visual, like impressionistic, just going outside and like seeing the light and trying to capture that becomes more interesting to me than the symbolic. And I can see it going along with my coming more into my body,
Mm.
you know.
That makes sense. And so when you were a monk, were you spending most of your day meditating?
We were meditating and then chores, and but even when we did chores, it was like silent kind of. It's interesting that I mean a lot of what kind of goes under spiritual is kind of mental to me. And so it was mental, and even though like the idea in the Christian like mystical tradition is incarnation, it means into the body, embodiment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like God is in the body and like it's pointing you to the body.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas practically in the kind of Christian culture, I find it very disembodied,
Very much.
like denying the body. And
Yeah.
so I had like those things going on too.
I kind of feel like a lot of religious traditions are trying to contain male proclivities, and so there is a disembodiment because there's a lot of body force and power that they're trying to just contain or learn how to regulate. Whereas for women, we have obviously we have a monthly cycle. There's an attunement by necessity, and those sort of institutionalized monotheistic religions are necessarily for different needs. Like it's not for women's needs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that just feels really clear to me that, the body has been demonized, but it's really the urges of men versus the body versus a female and her own relationship with her body is different.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be regulated because we're forced to
Mm.
be in concert with it on a lot more regular basis. We're forced to endure pain on a regular basis in a way that trains us to accept it because we can't get away from it in a way that men sometimes can. They're better at compartmentalizing. Just the
Yeah.
brain doesn't fire in the same way. Yeah, I think the institutionalization of disembodiment is really, really strong. And there is a bias to helping men regulate that ignores the perspective of the female and how she operates in her body.
Hmm. So when you say like the bias that ignores, like, because what you're saying that it's just not necessary, more happens naturally for women, or
No, not necessary. For instance, there's like attunement, and I'm not a mother, so I don't know about that, but there's this inner knowing and intuition and guidance that when you deny the body, you don't listen to it. And so you're trained to not listen and be perceptive to your inner signals. And I guess, in a way, that's what I'm teaching is to be perceptive and listen to these inner signals, but just the inner signals of a human body, the 2 feet, the pelvic floor. But again, the pelvic floor feels a little different for a man versus a woman. And what I've noticed as I work with people is because of the larger, more muscular shoulder girdle and how a man is able to power themselves through their upper body more, that working there is as a first pass, actually, there's a lot of benefit to organizing the shoulder girdle,
mm,
to helping that breathe in a way that allows better access to the pelvis. I've seen that now, and men need more of that, more of integrating the shoulder girdle, feeling how their spine can support it before they try to access their pelvis. Because it's kind of
yeah.
hard to go right there when this is bulky and in a fixed way. So to
Mm.
get more fluidity through there will allow more access to the pelvis.
Okay. Well, that's interesting, helpful, makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking more what you're saying about the male disembodiment customs or like culture. I noticed as I started to be less, kind of move away interiorly from the
Mm.
monastic, as I started to come more in my body and listen to my body. And looking back, like over the past years, I kind of experienced, and then someone told me what I was doing, like just free, like Katsugen Undo, like moving from an inner, letting the body move itself. How does
Mhm.
my hand feel like moving right now? And as I did that, I like I was struck by, oh, how patterned I've been, like how
Mm,
restricted.
yeah.
And the monastery was very restricted. Like you're
Yes.
taught like how to stand and sit,
Yes.
and keep your arms, and if you walk down the hall like this, they'll correct you,
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely the containment that helps to take out your personality so you could just be single focused, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But it seems also single focused, and it's an intentional patterning, but like also like conceptually patterned, and like belief and images and the body. And I see that like just kind of more widely too, culturally, or certainly in this culture. Like I've been outside just moving
Hmm.
freely moving, then the police would come. Like, like there's something wrong.
No, they want to know. Should we tell him to leave? That's so funny.
Yeah, I mean, they're worried, like, am I on drugs? Am I
Oh, are you?
crazy? Like, why is this person? And it kind of, I mean, it pointed out like how patterned everybody is. Like once
Yeah,
somebody just starts moving from an inner impulse,
yeah,
it's like, oh, we got to call the police.
yeah. Okay, so I did this movement and I still do it, and I teach it in my class sometimes called continuum. And it is to feel the inner impulse of fluid in your system. And we tone to activate the body, and we use different tones. And then you wait and you wait for the impulse. And then that's what it is. It's this fluid thing. When she traveled and when she had her workshops here, she would have it multiple days, and she called it dives. We would sleep in the place, and we would be doing this for days on end. So you took yourself to the bathroom when you needed to, you took a break and slept when you needed to, you ate when you needed to, but we were making our sounds. So it's dark, we're undulating, we're making these sounds. Some places, parts of the US, they were scared. I mean, it's definitely that sort of thing is what women were burned for back in the day, for being in touch with the sensuality of their system,
Yeah.
to come together. And what we did was we would create a field, and you would be able to, when you were doing that, you were riding the field, and it was a thing. You could feel it because everybody's doing it. You're kind of vibing on a different level, and it was cool, but it was also trippy and weird. And yeah, if you just kind of hopped into it, it'd be like, what are you doing?
Yeah, well, yeah, in this culture, early they would think you're possessed, like by
Yeah,
demons or something. And I've done some. I took a workshop in Buto, Noguchi. I found that moving outside my patterning and even the sensing body is like coming back to more natural, less like culturally patterned
yeah,
body. It also loosens up my emotional, behavioral, and mental patterning. And I could see why that could feel threatening to people, like
yeah, for sure.
because you're not sure what's down there. It's like the fear of the natural.
Yeah, or the fear of the unknown, or the fear of not knowing what direction something's going in, if it's gonna
Mhm.
be too fast of a descent. Sometimes when people drop down deep into their body and it's a little too fast, they get a little scared. I knew that that was possible, and I try to put some guardrails in, and that's one of the reasons I do it in standing. Can you speak a little bit about perspective? Maybe what you we talked about in our DMs about, like, there's a certain choice, and I mean you could see from so many different ways. You could make the
Yeah.
choice to see from multiple perspectives, to see from your experience of the mountain, or to see through instruments. Did you see Tim's Vermeer?
I haven't seen it. I've read about it and I'm familiar with some of Hockney's ideas about Vermeer.
It was fabulous. I thought it was great. Tim, because he was a technologist who did graphics for illustration for artists to use, he realized that the human eye doesn't see that. Just like that photorealistic painting
Mm.
that you showed me, you don't have the technology to see that at that time. There's no way he could have seen that.
I've had some of my art teachers like talk about some of those ideas about Vermeer. Like the teacher who ran this atelier, he's very like amazing visually. I'd pick up a painting I like from a book and show it to him, and all of a sudden he'd go, "Oh, look at that and that," and I'm like, "Wow!" Or I'd be working on something for like 20 hours, and he'd come and like right away go, "Oh, look at that's all off." So he had a great eye, and that was kind of his specialty was like this more realistic visual impression like art. Vermeer had different instruments and artists are always trying instruments, but he felt those that they kind of were putting too much on the instrument because he thought you really can do a lot more with the eye and that artists have
Mm,
like developed a lot more of looking and that he felt
right.
that a lot of what they were attributing to like instruments that he thought more of it is not instruments aren't needed, like that
Yeah.
if you really look, just learn to look and learn
Yeah.
about pain and mixing pain and things. I guess the intention in what you see, like, because with perspective, it stands out when you look at paintings, like historically in the West, like in the Renaissance, when they start different things, where perspective is one that they start using more in their painting. And people before, like the icons in the medieval art, and when I'll show it to students and they'll go, "Oh man, those guys really didn't know how to draw, and their perspective is all
Yeah.
off." And like, but they were trying to do something different. They were actually breaking perspective intentionally. Gepser, he influenced this guy, Ken Wilber. Gepser, when he's looking at that kind of art history, he called it a burst of perspectival consciousness. To me, it's like a mystification explanation. It's interesting learning things you're doing, like talking about this front of the spine, and I'll think, oh, that's what like these meditation teachers were talking about, but they had this mystified way of talking about it. So with this explanation of a consciousness that's just growing and then it
Mm.
unfolds and then it shows up as like people see perspective that they didn't see before. I didn't like that mystifying part of it. So I tried to go back to this guy Gebser and his examples and things, and it didn't make sense to me. It kind of was like a theory being
Mm.
mapped onto things.
That's
And
funny because there's a lot of that.
yeah, and yeah, I think so. And I try to be aware of that and notice where I do it. And I found other people who had different ideas and that kind of seemed more promising and like historically, and also examples that really contradict that. Like when you find, like, there's an Egyptian book, it was in Egypt by Euclid, like 300 BC, and he called it optics. It's what we call perspective, but it's actually like more real than the Renaissance perspective because
Mm.
in this Greek Egyptian book, he's using cones with sphere bottoms,
Uh,
not like triangles. Like in painting, they just use lines and triangles. But he
yeah.
says, no, he used the idea of like rays of vision, but he said they're like it's a sphere at the end, like a section of a sphere. So they would do geometry like with spheres and going out. In some Renaissance perspective, they straightened it, like they made just an end, like a straight line, which is good enough for painting, but it was like, well, this Egyptian Greek guy, he's clearly understood like perspective. There's examples of Chinese talking about perspective, but why they aren't using what he calls single point perspective. I stay in one spot and look,
Yeah.
focus my eyes, then I see this convergence and things getting smaller. I didn't buy the idea that people didn't see perspective. Or people will say things like, oh, people didn't see blue because there wasn't a word for blue, like the sky wasn't blue. But
Uh-huh.
you have to distinguish. I think they were seeing the light, but well, why did it come up in the Renaissance, this focus on perspective and realism? And the what seems more to me right explanation is that there was an interest in it. It wasn't just like this mysterious consciousness kind of bubbled up and people just saw this perspective for some reason. But there was a reason why they were interested in it. Part of the reason that makes sense to me is that the people who were commissioning the art
Mm.
and training the artists, like Michelangelo was brought up by the Florence people who wanted the paintings. They trained him. And so the artists like wasn't just the free spirit, they were commissioned, and so the people who were commissioning them had a vision of what they wanted.
Mm.
And they were merchants and they traveled and they developed their vision. So if you're traveling and you're meeting strangers, and you're buying objects and you're collecting things and you're going through landscapes and you're using your vision different than a monk in a monastery who's just looking at a candle or like symbolic images. They just want images
Mm-hmm.
of their faith. That's what I think, like in a kind of as concise I could put it, is part of the reason it because of the merchants and I guess how they were using vision.
Mm,
So when the priests are ruling the culture,
mm,
they want images of their dogmas. And that's what art is for. And they're paying the artist to paint images of their teachings. And that's what it's coming from. And then,
see.
but then when the merchants are actually looking at the world and interested and looking at faces and how do I read your face and can I
Mm-hmm.
trust you? And I'm just traveling through mountains all the time. And science kind of comes from that, like counting
Yeah.
and measuring. Where are they drawing from? Are they drawing from their ideas, like dogmas of faith?
Yeah.
Like, or are they drawing from the immediate sense experience? Right now, the light that as the sun is changing, there that's like my actual sense data closer. I'm just drawing that. Or am I drawing from my memory, which is different? And Degas thought it added a unity if you drew from your memory, even if you
Mm,
go back to check, but he didn't want you to draw while you're looking, like which you can kind of like a contour. I'm just looking, and he wanted you to look and say, okay, what's that angle? I like whatever I want to draw now, or that curve, and look at it, and then absorb it, and then draw it from your memory. And he said it's not like as exact, but it has a
mhm.
more of a unity.
Yeah.
Like,
So you're processing it through yourself in a much deeper level because you have to extract it from a whole memorized thing rather than I'm kind of doing the pieces. Yeah.
so that's like a different, that will make a different image.
Yeah.
Even like the cave paintings, the animals in the caves.
Yeah.
I mean, those were from memory because they're in a cave, the animals,
Yeah.
but they're very, I mean, they're incredible. Like they come from a lot of observation, but it
Yeah.
gets kind of simplified, like in through the memory process. Like,
Well, you know that course drawing from the right side of the brain?
mhm.
What was just fantastic for me was to do that exercise where it was an outline of a horse and you turn it upside down and you just you show 1 inch and then you draw each piece. And then by the time you get to the end and flip it over, you've made a great copy
Mm.
of the horse because you weren't drawing what you thought a horse was, you were just drawing what you saw.
Yeah.
That was just really revelatory for me, and especially when you're doing faces. And when I went to take an actual drawing class, I got that down. Like the
Mm.
sheet that they hung on the wall, you had to draw the shadows and stuff. It looked really good and,
Mm.
copying stuff. And then depth was kind of hard, getting the perspective right. And that was a little disheartening. But when you talk about drawing from memory and the value of that and the holism of that, it makes me think of it in an entirely different way. Like
Mm.
you can have the distortion, and that's not necessarily a mistake. It's almost like an
Mm.
interpretation, and it's your
Yeah.
relationship to depth and distance, and it's really liberating.
So, and like you could draw your idea of a horse,
Uh-huh.
which like children do.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting too. It's a different, they're like all interesting in their own way.
Yeah.
Like as long as but if you look at one for what the other's doing, then you're like, oh, well, that's not right perspective, but maybe the person was like doing their memory and it's like an interesting. And another one is I don't, a layer that I see is like patterns. So
Hmm.
there's like your sense and then your memories of your sense and a processing. And then there's like gathering memories into like more general patterns. Like, and it seems like that's how I think of the Egyptian paintings. If you've seen them, like a typical thing the Egyptians will do, they'll paint a face in profile from the
Hmm.
side, but the eye from the front. And I thought, well, those are like the most recognizable patterns. Like the profile's really distinct from the person. When
Hmm.
it's flat on, you kind of lose things.
So they
Like,
were like using the strongest patterns from each perspective and bringing it into a new construction.
yes,
Yeah, that's really
the
cool to
the
think
head
about
is
it that way.
sideways, the eye is front, the
Yeah,
shoulders are front because that's more recognizable than side shoulders.
yeah.
And they put it together, and I thought I was trying to like, what are they doing? Well, they're like getting the most recognizable pattern.
Wow, that's interesting. Like,
Yeah.
what if we did our driver's ID like that? That would be so great. That's super interesting to consider it that way and to now to observe and look at art from that way and try to feel the different perspectives that are represented in front of you.
And then, yeah, I think you can appreciate it more because you're not looking for kind of what they aren't doing and like being disappointed. Like, oh, it's not realistic, but it's like the Egyptian, oh my gosh, they didn't know how to draw. Like, it's all wonky.
Yeah.
I go, okay, they're doing something kind of representing something different. And they could be like kind of experts at it or geniuses in each form. But then it's interesting why at certain times in history, one is dominant. So Impressionism, it really seems like the most, as far as I know, in history, like the time when there were people who just were interested in the pure vision and like painting, like what is the light through the trees? Like
Mm.
that that's kind of mysterious. Maybe there were little exceptions, but nobody had really done that before. I mean, in little ways. And you have Leonardo, he's looking at like the light and the distance, and he's trying to just look and paint his eyes. Why did that arise at that time? And that it seemed like there was some kind of freedom to, like just go outside and really look at things. It kind of parallels my experience. Like I was into all this like symbolic art, and then, but because, but there was also something kind of blocking me from really seeing and enjoying the pure light. Like it took so long for people to find so many people who just spent all this time looking at the pure visual impression for its own sake,
Yeah.
like Monet. And you see it starting in earlier painters, but it still was very like the kind of conceptual and story was still dominant and culture like effects.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like ebb and flows of that, of like more sensual and more representational and more sensual and more representational, like weaving back and forth depending on like how restrictive just the culture is, like how
Mm.
unstable things are. So maybe people are more representational because it doesn't feel safe to feel sensual, and then when
Yeah.
things are safer, like you can expand out and be more sensual. I mean, that's how it is in the human system, right? If you're in emergency, you're not sensing. You're just focused. Let's
Mm.
survive this. You freeze up and you're locked away from that sensual ebb and flow because you're in emergency mode. And so as a society, that's what happens too. When we're in emergency mode or when things are chaotic, you want more structure. Authoritarianism comes in to kind of contain the chaos. And then
Mm.
when things are peaceful and stable, then you can do more of this thing, and explore,
Mm.
be open. Yeah, for the Impressionism.
I think it was after the Enlightenment and scientific revolution. So I'm sure that came in like studies of light, like
Yeah.
also like actual Newton with the prism. I would think of it maybe kind of like the end before the world wars and the like, so there was like a kind of an optimism of observation,
That's a really interesting way to put it. I
exploration.
I just saw a documentary about the rise of Hitler and how doctor decided to go to Galapagos to start a new society. And I mean, the story is crazy because it's true. And I keep thinking about it. You have two extremes and then you have the stable middle. I won't tell you the end if you wanted to watch it, but it was just like unbelievable, like gruesome. And here you were trying to create an Eden and it was total destruction. It was awful. And who
And so,
survived? Who survived the middle path? Their family is still on the island.
and culturally, someone had like a contrast that said, do you feel in the world more like a tree in a forest or a passenger on the Titanic? His view was that our progress in technology and the conveniences that it brings come with losses of freedom, but we don't really feel those until like the iceberg comes up. So he
Mm,
said, even when we're on the Titanic, sometimes we're enjoying it. We're like moving but we're in this thing that's become like so big. And so people feel an anxiety because they sense the loss of freedom, even with the convenience, like the
yeah,
dehumanizing loss of freedom. And some people like feel it more. But when you hit the iceberg or something comes, then you realize, oh, like how locked in that technology
yeah.
makes us. So I was thinking of those two images and I was thinking with your work, if you would agree with this, but it seemed like you're integrating both to feel like I'm a tree in a forest and I'm rooted, but I am on this technological ship, but how to be in that and like find the forest, the motion of the
Yeah.
technology and the culture. We can't just jump off. What would you think in your work, like those two images of feeling in the world?
I think of two things. I think one that we don't know what's going to happen in the future, especially now. And so I get back to that choice thing. It's like you could choose to be optimistic and hopeful for something,
Hmm.
because when I go down that path, I don't see of the dystopic future. I try to be aware of both futures. Like with AI, there's the dystopic people, but then there are the people who are like optimists and it's going to fix everything, and it's somewhere in between. And I think we always end up, and getting back to that Eden documentary I was talking about, there was extreme. One was really idealistic and one was crass and exploitative, and the one in the middle was just a family trying to live a life. And that's the middle path. And to me, that's the most grounded and optimistic way of approaching the future, is to stay present and building something and being committed and optimistic.
Hmm.
The other woman who ended up staying, she lived to be 95 and she had the first baby on Galapagos. She's like, we're not going anywhere. This is our home. We built our home here. We've built our life. She was committed. And that
Hmm.
to me is something that actually is, I think, valuable, to be committed, just committed to the continual enhancement of humanity. And so you could say that AI is like, oh, it's so scary and it's going to take over and whatever. But it, on the other hand, like all the stuff that I'm teaching you is there's more research about it because they're trying to figure out how humans work to
Yeah.
replicate humans, which makes no sense, which we won't be able to do. But the more we learn about it, the more we learn what parts
Hmm.
of ourselves are more human and how
Yeah.
we can access more of that. And then as we reveal that, and we don't have to be mechanistic robots because now we have robots, it's
Hmm.
like the only jobs that are going to be left are jobs of caring for each other.
Hmm.
That's what
Hmm.
I think. And, the more we learn to care for each other, that just might change the whole equation completely. So,
Hmm.
I choose to be optimistic, basically.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I like that. There was a fellow, Robert Anton Wilson. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was a writer. As a boy, he was very sick.
Uh-huh.
I forget what it was, but he had to spend months in a
Mm,
kind of hospital
mm.
situation thing. And he said he noticed, and he was just a young boy, and he said he noticed the optimistic people got better and left more than the pessimistic people. And so he said he just decided, he said, I don't know, I can't prove anything, but it just looks better.
Nice.
It works better to be optimistic. I do find reasons too, like, intend to follow. I have kind of a trust in the bigger evolutionary process that
Mm,
we're kind of part of. It's more than we understand. I feel like the better things come, and if they're there and people see it, like, oh, look at those people and how they care for each other or
yeah.
take care of children. And then, okay, those are like models.
All right. Well, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. That was a lot of fun
Okay.
talking to you.